I gave up everything I owned. My company. My mansion. My name, even. All to find out one simple thing. Did my family love me, or did they love my money? What I found out nearly broke me. Let me back up. My name is Richard. Well, that's not the name I used during those 6 weeks, but we'll get to that. For now, just know that 3 months ago, I was worth close to $2 billion. I built a logistics company from a single delivery van when I was 26 years old. 30 years later, that van turned into a fleet of thousands, warehouses on 4 continents, and a family that never had to want for anything. You'd think that's the happy ending, right? Man builds empire. Man provides for his family. Everybody wins. But here's the thing nobody tells you about having money. It changes how people look at you. And after a while, you stop knowing if they're looking at you, or looking at what's in your bank account. I started noticing it about 2 years ago. Little things. My son Marcus stopped calling just to talk. Every call started with, "Hey Dad," and ended with, "Dad, actually, I wanted to ask you something." My daughter Elena, she'd visit more often right before her birthday. My own wife, Diane, God rest her memory, she passed 4 years back, she used to warn me. She'd say, "Richard, money makes people perform love. You need to watch for who loves you when you have nothing to give." I didn't listen to her then. I wish I had. So after she passed, and after I started noticing the pattern with my kids, I made a decision that everyone around me thought was insane. I decided to disappear. Not really disappear. I told my lawyer and my head of security where I'd be, in case something happened. But everyone else? My children, my extended family, my closest friends, my business partners? They all thought I'd left the country for an extended medical retreat. Some wellness thing. Sounds believable when you're old and rich, trust me. What actually happened is I gave myself a new identity. I grew out a beard I never would have allowed in the boardroom. I bought second-hand clothes from a thrift store, clothes that didn't fit right, that smelled like someone else's life. I stopped shaving, stopped cutting my hair, stopped doing anything that made me look like the man in the magazine profiles. And then I went and lived on the streets of my own city. You might be wondering how someone just does that. How do you go from silk shirts to sleeping on cardboard? Let me tell you, it's not like flipping a switch. The first night, I stood outside a homeless shelter for 2 hours before I could make myself walk in. I kept thinking I could just go home. I could just call my driver. But something in me needed to see the truth, no matter how much it cost me. That first night in the shelter, I didn't sleep. Not even for a minute. The sounds alone were enough to keep you awake, coughing, someone crying quietly 2 cots over, someone else pacing back and forth mumbling to themselves. I lay there staring at the ceiling thinking about my daughter's wedding, which I paid $400,000 for. I thought about my son's business that I funded twice after it failed. And I thought, will either of them even notice I'm gone? That question haunted me every single night for the next 6 weeks. Now here's where it gets hard to talk about. So bear with me. About a week and a half into this experiment, I decided to test the waters. I found out where Marcus was having lunch, a place he went every Tuesday with his business partners, some upscale bistro downtown. I walked up to the outdoor patio, in my worn-out coat, my beard scraggly, my hands shaking slightly from the cold and the hunger, and I asked him for help. I said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm having a really hard time. Could you spare anything? Even just enough for a meal?" My own son, my own flesh and blood, looked me directly in the eyes. And didn't recognize me. I know what you're thinking. Of course he didn't recognize me, I looked completely different. But here's the part that gutted me. It wasn't that he didn't know it was me. It's what he said next. He waved his hand like he was swatting away a fly and said, "I don't have cash on me. Try somewhere else." Then he turned right back to his friends and kept talking about a golf trip to Scottish Highlands. I stood there for a second. Just a second. long enough to feel something crack inside my chest. Then I walked away before anyone could see the tears. You'd think that would have been enough. You'd think I would have just gone home right then, confronted him, said, "It's me, your father, how could you turn away a homeless man without even a second thought?" But I didn't. Because deep down, I needed to know if this was just Marcus, or if it was everyone. So I kept going. 3 days later, I tracked down my daughter Elena. She was leaving her yoga studio, the one I paid the membership for, by the way, $300 a month, and I approached her in the parking lot. Same thing. Ragged coat, dirty hands, desperate voice. I said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. I just need a little help. I haven't eaten today." Elena, to her credit, didn't ignore me completely. She reached into her purse. But then she stopped. She looked at me for a long moment. This uncomfortable, almost disgusted look crossed her face, and she said, "You should really get yourself cleaned up. There are shelters for this, you know. It's honestly kind of embarrassing, standing out here like this." Then she got in her car and drove away. Embarrassing. That's the word she used. My daughter, my little girl who I used to carry on my shoulders at the county fair, thought a starving man was an embarrassment to be avoided. I sat down on the curb after that. Just sat there in the cold for almost an hour. I wasn't crying anymore at that point. I think I was too numb for tears. I just kept thinking about all the birthdays, all the vacations, all the checks I signed without even asking questions. And here I was, invisible to the two people who should have cared the most. Now, I want to pause here and tell you something important, because I think this is the turning point of the whole story, even though it doesn't feel like a turning point yet. It feels like the bottom. But sometimes the bottom is exactly where you need to be to see things clearly. Because that night, sitting outside that shelter again, something happened that changed everything. A woman named Carol sat down next to me. She was maybe 60 years old, weathered face, kind eyes, the kind of eyes that have seen hardship but haven't let it turn them bitter. She'd been living on the streets for almost 3 years after losing her job and then her apartment during a health crisis. She noticed I hadn't eaten. She had half a sandwich, just half, wrapped up carefully like it was something precious. And she broke it, and gave me half of her half. I tried to refuse. I told her I couldn't take her food. And she said something I'll never forget as long as I live. She said, "Honey, we don't have much out here. But what little we got we share. That's how we survive. Not with money. With each other." I sat there holding that piece of bread like it was made of gold. Because here's the truth. This woman, who had nothing, who owned literally everything she carried in one backpack, gave more to a stranger in 30 seconds than my own children gave to a man they thought was destitute. That's when I started crying again. Really crying. And Carol just sat with me. Didn't ask questions. Didn't pry. Just sat there in silence, letting me fall apart, because sometimes that's the only thing another human being can offer you, and it turns out, it's usually enough. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think about it every day now. Over the next few weeks, I met more people like Carol. A young guy named Dev who'd aged out of foster care with nowhere to go, who still shared his coffee with anyone who looked colder than him. An older man named Frank, a Vietnam veteran, who taught me how to find the warmest spots to sleep at night, and who never once asked me for anything, only offered. You might be wondering, did I ever go back and confront Marcus and Elena? Did I ever tell them who I was? I did. Eventually. But not right away. Because first, I needed to figure out something bigger than my anger. I needed to figure out who I actually wanted to be, now that I knew the truth about my kids. See, here's the thing about being rich for 30 years. You start to believe the money is what makes you valuable. What makes you worth loving. And when you find out that the people closest to you only show up when the money's involved, it doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your entire understanding of yourself. I spent almost 3 weeks just processing that. Sleeping in shelters, eating in soup kitchens, working small jobs when I could, sweeping floors, washing dishes, anything that would get me a few dollars and a meal. And slowly, something started shifting in me. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. Because everyone around me, everyone in that world, had lost more than I had, and yet they still smiled. They still laughed. They still showed up for each other. Carol used to say, "The measure of a person isn't what they got. It's what they do with what little they got." That hit me harder than anything Wall Street ever taught me. So here's what I decided to do. I went back to my old life. I cleaned up, I called my lawyer, I reactivated everything. But before I confronted my kids, I did something else first. I quietly, without any press, without any announcement, set up a trust fund. Not for Marcus. Not for Elena. For Carol. For Dev. For Frank. For every single person who showed me kindness during those 6 weeks when I had nothing to offer them in return. I got Carol into permanent housing. I paid for Dev to finish his trade school certification. He wanted to be an electrician. I made sure Frank got connected with proper veterans healthcare, something that had fallen through the cracks for years. Then, and only then, did I call Marcus and Elena and ask them to come to the house. I'll never forget the look on their faces when I opened the door. Because I hadn't shaved yet. I still had the beard. I still had, well, not the same clothes, but I made sure I looked rough enough that there was no mistaking it. Marcus went pale. Actually pale, like all the blood drained from his face at once. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just told them calmly, 3 weeks ago, I asked both of you for help. I was hungry. I was cold. And neither of you saw me as a human being worth helping. You saw an inconvenience. The silence in that room, I don't think I can fully describe it. Elena started crying almost immediately, saying she didn't know, she would have never, if she'd just known it was me. And that right there, that's exactly the problem, isn't it? If she'd known it was me. Not if she'd known a person needed help. If she'd known there was money attached to helping. Marcus tried to explain himself for almost 10 minutes straight. Business stress, distraction, he didn't even really see my face, he was so wrapped up in his own world. Maybe some of that's true. People get busy. People get distracted. I understand that better than almost anyone, believe me, I built an empire. I know what tunnel vision looks like. But here's what I told them, and this is the part one really wants you to hear, wherever you are watching this from. I said, I'm not angry that you didn't recognize me. I'm heartbroken that it didn't matter to you either way. Recognizing me was never the point. Being decent to a stranger who needed help, that was the point. And you both failed that test, not because you're bad people, but because somewhere along the way, I taught you that money is what determines who deserves kindness. That's the part that really stung. Because in a way, this wasn't just their failure. It was mine too. I raised them in a world where the rich were surrounded by fences, and the different, the poor, the struggling, they existed somewhere outside those fences, easy to ignore, easy to drive past. I did that. Not on purpose. But I did it. So we talked for hours that night. Real talk, the kind we hadn't had in years. I told them everything, about Carol, about Dev, about Frank, about that piece of bread that meant more to me than any meal I'd eaten in a 5-star restaurant. I watched something shift in both their faces as I spoke. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it fixed everything overnight, because that's not how real change works, and I think you know that too, if you've lived any kind of real life yourself. But something did change. Marcus started volunteering at a shelter downtown, the same one I stayed at, actually. Not for show. He asked me specifically not to tell anyone, no press, no photo ops. Just him, showing up on Saturday mornings, serving food, learning names, learning stories. Elena, she started something different. She began a small program funding transitional housing for women aging out of difficult situations, using her own money this time, not mine. She said she wanted to build something that was actually hers, something that meant something. Now look, I'm not telling you this story to brag about my kids turning their lives around, because honestly, that part is still ongoing, still messy, still imperfect. I'm telling you this story because of what it taught me, and what I think it can teach you too, if you let it. We live in a world that measures people by their bank accounts, their titles, their followers, their square footage. And somewhere in that measuring, we forget the only thing that actually matters: how we treat people who can do nothing for us in return. Carol taught me that with half a sandwich. Dev taught me that with a cup of coffee shared on a freezing morning. Frank taught me that by never once asking for anything, only ever offering. I spent 30 years building a fortune, thinking that's what would secure my family's love, my family's loyalty, my family's respect. Turns out, it almost destroyed it. It took losing everything, even if just for 6 weeks, to find out what actually holds a family, or any relationship, together. It's not money. It's never been money. It's showing up. It's seeing people, really seeing them, even when they have nothing to offer you. Especially when they have nothing to offer you. So here's what I want to leave you with, whoever's watching this, wherever you're at in your life right now. If you've got someone in your life who shows up for you when you're struggling, when you've got nothing, when you're at your absolute lowest, hold on to that person. That's rare. That's the real wealth in this life. And if you've ever walked past someone who was struggling, and didn't stop to help, I'm not judging you, because God knows I did the same thing for 30 years without even realizing it. But maybe, just maybe, this story is your sign to stop next time. To really look at people. To remember that everyone you pass on the street was somebody's baby once, somebody's whole world, and somehow, life brought them to a sidewalk asking strangers for help. I think about Carol every single day. I think about that piece of bread. And honestly, it taught me more about being human than 30 years of business deals ever did. If this story moved you, even a little, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have recognized someone you love if they were struggling right in front of you? Would you have stopped? Really think about it, because I thought I knew the answer too, before all of this happened. And if you want more real stories like this one, stories about family, about money, about what really matters when everything else falls away, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, I've got more of these, and they're not always easy to tell, but I think they're the ones worth hearing. Thanks for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next one.